Hi, I'm Charlene Jorgensen and welcome to Quilting from the Heartland. Today I'm going to show you how to make chicken pin cushions or door stops using the log cabin templates. By now you know that we've done many different things with the log cabin templates, and these are really fun little projects to do. The chickens that are pin cushions are made from the miniature log cabin templates, and then of course the larger ones are from the larger log cabin templates, which I came out with first. The chickens can be either made into hens or roosters depending on how you connect the blocks in the end. You'll notice that on the hen we have the light part of the block towards the top, and then on the rooster we have the dark part on the block. On the larger ones, my neighbors, when they were stuffing them, decided that they needed a little decoration on them, so they added a bow to the hen and then the wattles to the rooster, and that's something that we just pinned on so that you could see how it added to the rooster. These are cute just sitting around the house too as decorations, if that's what you want to use them for. Wonderful bazaar items or gifts for your quilting friends. Now I've used scraps to make my chickens, and that's, I'm sure, what most of you will want to do, is use scraps left over from some of your last sewing projects. Some of you might have brighter fabrics, and so they would match probably the decor in your home better. These are left over from the pineapple log cabin, which I'm going to be showing you next week how to do. Some of my scraps were larger than others, and ahead of time I have laid some of them on top of each other to get them ready to do the strips. This one is smaller, and then here we've got some tinier pieces under here, but that doesn't matter. We're going to cut them all at the same time anyway, and we will first straighten them all at one time to get ready to use the logs for cutting. And I do all my cutting with the small rotary cutter rather than the large one. I find that I have more accuracy with the small cutter. The first cut I make, I always go backwards first and then forward. And I move my left hand ahead as I'm cutting. That way I won't move the ruler. And always remember to close the cutter before you place it down. And then I allow plenty of room to turn the whole board with all of the fabric up on top of the board. That way I won't lose some of the accuracy that I've started out with. Now I'm going to cut many logs at a time, and off to my right you'll see all the different shapes that are used in the log cabin block, and of course I'm not going to cut all of those today, but you'll see how they graduate from small to large, and that I have little fabric grips on the back side, and that keeps them from sliding when I'm cutting the fabric. Now the 1/4 inch seam allowance is included in all the templates, which is a really nice feature to have. Now I'm just going to take one particular template and show you how you determine how wide to cut your strips. I'm going to cut the strips of fabric to accommodate the length rather than the width, and that way I don't waste as much fabric. So this time we're going to cut a 3-inch strip of fabric. I will line the line on the ruler, or the 3-inch line on the ruler, with the straightened edge of the fabric, and then at one time we will cut 7 layers of fabric is what we happen to have this time. And we'll remove that out of the way. And then I like to move up on a small mat board, which I have off to the right, and we'll bifold the fabric up on top of that, and then just lay that template up on top of all those strips. And you can get a lot of logs cut at one time. Now if you're going to make a lot of chickens, this is the way you would do it. You would mass cut many of these, or if you were going to go on and make little quilts that I'm going to show you at the end of the program, this is how you'd want to do that. You wouldn't want to cut just a couple pieces at a time. And you just work your way across until you've used up all the strips. Now, if you're going to work just strictly with little scraps of fabric, Then let's just say that your scrap is this small. You would lay your template up there and see how you can just take advantage of the smallest piece of fabric that you might have. And if you work on a small mat board, see how nice it is to turn that board as you work your way around the template. So you can use up the tiniest little pieces of fabric that you have in your sewing room. Now if you're cutting from mini scraps, you would just lay many of them up on top of each other and get the same thing. So I usually stack 6 to 8 layers of fabric always when I'm cutting. So you have a dark and a light side to your little hand, and you would just repeat that. You would cut, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lights in this one, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 darks of logs in this little chicken. And you just repeat and do the cutting the logs from the darker fabrics just like I did the light ones. The rooster and the hen also have the little tails, and to cut those, all you need to do is cut 2 little 2.5-inch squares. And there just happens to be a little ruler for that now. You place the little square on top of 2 scraps of fabric, and this is going to be for the rooster. And again, just like cutting out the logs, you can turn your board, and I bumped it so we'll get to line it up again. Sometimes I put little fabric grips on the rulers too, and that makes it easier to control the ruler when you're cutting. Okay, now the tail feathers are little triangles, so to get the triangle, I will cut the square in half diagonally, going from this point to that point. So now we have 2 tails for the rooster. And what we'll do over at the sewing machine is I'll show you how to sew these units together to make the tails that are needed in both the hen and rooster. Well, I think we're ready now to go to the sewing machine and actually make one of these little birds. Ahead of time, I have lined up all the pieces at the sewing machine that are used in the little chickens, and we'll set these off to the side so that you can enjoy them while we're working on them. Actually, I need one for a pin cushion over here. We're going to start out in the center of the block, and here's one completed block all ready to go. We'll start in the center of the block, and then we'll work our way around adding logs as we go. To start the little chickens, you have to have a light and a dark, and that's what it starts out with in the center. So if you were going to make one, either a hen or a rooster, you'd have to have 2 of these units. So you'd have to have 2 lights and 2 darks. The sewing machine has the perfect scant 1/4-inch seam allowance already included in the quilting window that we have to pick from. And the reason that I recommend sewing with a scant 1/4-inch seam allowance is so that you make up for the fabric that's used in the seam line. And that's very important for having perfect patchwork to get your blocks to lay nice and flat when they're done. If you've ever looked at some quilts, you probably see some ripples, or probably they've tried to stretch it to fit, and that's probably because the right seam allowance hasn't been used. I like to always start sewing on an anchor cloth, and I don't do any back stitching because it just creates bulk in the corners. And I'm not going to use any pins, but I will guide these tiny little pieces with a stiletto in front of the presser foot. We'll just send a couple of these through. And then I'll show you how to take a sewing test. These are tiny little pieces. Actually, I have started working with miniatures, and I just really find that you become hooked with them, or hooked on them. You go through different stages of what you like to work on, and lately that's what I have enjoyed mostly, is working with the littler things. After you have sewn the light and dark pieces together, you finger press them open and then press with an iron. And if you have passed the sewing test, these two little pieces will match the next piece that you're going to add, and that's how you know if you've done it just right. And that's also very important. If it doesn't match, you might think, well, I'll just trim it off, but your problem will multiply every time you add another piece, so you might just as well get it right in the beginning. In making the log cabin, I prefer to press all my seams open, and you'll notice that on the back side of the block there's as much fabric on the back side on the miniature as there is showing on the right side. What I should say is there's as much of the right side of the fabric showing on the wrong side of the block as there is on the right side, because the block starts out at a 1-inch strip and the seam allowances are a 1/4 inch on both sides. Okay, over to the left here I have taken the block a little farther and started working my way around, and I was chain sewing some pieces together, and I do that to save time as well as thread. And I have already added the bee to the top of the block, and also I have a dark bee over here. Now we're ready to go to the next lighter piece, which would probably be this one, and we'll add that one right here. I think I had some more fabrics to choose from, so we'll switch to another one here. You want to alter the prints. See, we've already used that other one, so we want to switch this time. Now, when you add the next log, you want to always add it to the side that has 2 seams to cross over. That's how you remember which way to go with this block. And because this now fits the next log, I have used the correct seam allowance, and I'll sew with the seams on top so that I don't have to worry about them flipping back on the wrong side. And use the stiletto to hold those seams down as you work your way across the patchwork. And we'll be ready for the next piece on this one. We'll work on 2 at a time here. You do need 2 blocks for each chicken, whether it be the hen or the rooster. Okay, then we'll finger press it open. See how little that piece is in the center? You know what I do when I work with miniature pieces like this, I find that if I have added starch to washed fabric, it's easier to work with the small pieces. So what I do first is wash the fabric, dry it in the dryer, and then I use a spray starch to stabilize the little tiny pieces before I cut them out. That way it's a lot easier to work with. Well, it looks like I added that piece wrong because it's very easy to see what I've done. This one should have been a dark one instead of a light one. So let's show you what the right one will look like. Well, see how this one has gone wrong? So we need to have the dark one on this side. So let's see if we can do it right this time. Adding it to the side that has the 2 seams to cross over. We'll sew onto an anchor cloth. There, that looks a lot better. It's important to maintain that light and dark side to the block. And always take the time to press as you go. Notice that I keep a small iron beside me at the sewing machine, and then I use the bigger iron when I get when I need to iron bigger pieces of fabric. Okay, now I could use a light piece over here. And just keep working your way around the block until you have the unit as big as you want it to be. Now, if I hadn't passed that sewing test in the beginning, these logs that I'm adding now would not be fitting, and I would have to be easing them or trimming off the extra. And so what happens if you're making a large quilt, all your blocks would be a different size, and so you'd have to square them all up, and then the last round of your block would be distorted. Okay, there, that was the right one to do. Now we would be ready for another light one over here, and you would just keep working your way around, doing the same thing, always adding 2 light and then 2 dark until you have a completed block. Well, then after you've made 2 of these, it's time to make it into a hen or a rooster. If you want to make it into a hen, you put the 2 light sides together to make the top of the little hen. And ahead of time, I have inserted in here the comb that goes at the top of the head and a little beak over here. And you have to allow plenty of room for the pivot for the seam allowance so you don't get the beak and the comb on top of each other. We'll just pin those in place. And then we'll move this to the side and we'll show you what we're going to do here ahead of time. This one has already been sewn, and what we have done here is put, like I said, the 2 light sides together and the 2 dark parts of the block together. And to make it into a hen, or if you wanted to make it into a rooster, you would just reverse it and put the dark up here. You sew a little ways here, then leave an opening for stuffing it around and leave 1 dark side completely open, and that's where we're going to put the tail. After you have made that seam, then you trim the bulk off of the corner for turning it. Now we have to add some tails. So to make the tails, what you take is those 2 triangles that we sewed or cut out earlier, and you match them right sides together, and you're going to leave the bias edge open and sew here and here, and then you will clip the corner off like this, and then you would turn it inside out, and then you have to have one tail a little bit smaller than the other. So what I did was I decided which one I wanted on top, and then I trimmed them to the same size, and that's what's going to be now inserted in the little hen. Now to make the shape of the little hen, you're going to pull the 2 seams together, and you're going to stick the little tail inside of there. You know what you might want to do is find the center of the tail, butt it up there. Looks like we have it in the center, and then we'll sew across the top or across the bottom of the chicken. It's pretty easy to do, and like I said earlier, it's a great bazaar item that you can make. check to see that our seams are open on the bottom. And we'll be just about ready to turn it inside out. For this part now, you would want to reverse at the very end to strengthen the corner. And to clip the thread, we have an automatic thread cutter. It lifts the presser foot all by itself, and you just pull it out from the back, and we are ready to turn our little chicken. You might want to cut these corners, but let's first turn it inside out and make sure that we have sewn it correctly. And I think we have. You pull your comb out in your little beak. Of course, you'd take some kind of a blunt object to push out the corners, and there's our little hen. And like I said, I prefer to stuff it with the crushed walnut shells. Of course, you don't want to have the walnuts in there because they have oil in them. But we found our crushed walnut shells at a gun shop. They must use them for some part of the gunsmithing or something. I'm not just sure, but that's where we found our crushed walnuts. You know, there's a lot of other things that you can do with this block when it's completed, and I'd like to show you some of the little miniature quilts that we've also done with the same block that I showed you how to make. After you have made that one basic block, there are many different ways that you can arrange it to create the little quilts. And these are just some of the fun things that we have done with it. This one is very unusual, and I don't know if it has a name or not, but I like the effect that it gives. And also when you look at it, notice how we have done the quilting. Because the pieces are so small, we decided to put a little motif in the light area, and then the dark area has a meandering on it. On the next one that I'm showing you, we've done it in a diagonal set. And these ideas are just created by twisting and turning the blocks in many different ways. And in the light area, you'll notice that we have put a leaf design down the center. And also we have used a thread to stitch on the light area that's darker than the light fabric so that it shows up a lot better. And these logs then have been stitched in the center of each one, and we've done it in an L design on this particular one. And out on the outside edge, we've done a continuous line swirly design. On the next one, this is one of my favorite ones, we have done it in a zigzag set, and on the light area we have put some quilting with a feather design down in here, and same thing was done on the dark one. We actually had to use a larger feather design on the dark area because when you make the log cabin block, one half of the block can either be mainly light or mainly dark, and in this particular group of blocks we had more dark in our block than we had in the light. So I hope you've enjoyed watching all the different things that we've done with a simple traditional log cabin block today. I sure have a lot of fun working with it. I've decided that I could spend my whole lifetime creating things with this particular set of templates.